There are voices that feel older than the rooms they're born in. In a small church tucked between worn streets and trembling windows, a little girl once stood on a wooden bench so the choir director could see her face. The air carried that sound the way a river carries light, soft at first, then rising with a weight that didn't belong to a child. No one knew her name yet. They just felt something shift when she opened her mouth. Some said the voice came from the gut. Others said it came from a wound. But everyone agreed it carried a truth that made grown men sit up straighter. Long before the world placed crowns on singers and argued about who defined soul, there was this child who sang like she was fighting her way out of the dark. Her story would one day stretch across nightclubs, recording studios, cheap motels, courtrooms, hospitals, and finally the grand stages she had once imagined from a pew in the back. What transforms a girl born into chaos into a woman whose voice becomes a compass for generations? And what does such a gift demand in return? This is the beginning of that journey. She entered the world without the safety most children take for granted. Born in Los Angeles to a teenage mother who was still a child herself, she arrived in a haze of uncertainty. Her name was stitched together from borrowed syllables, given by people who hoped it might anchor her to something steady. But nothing stayed steady for long in that little apartment in Watts. Her mother drifted in and out like weather you couldn't predict. Men came and went. Money came and went even faster. The girl learned early that the world didn't always bend to protect the small. Yet inside that unstable home, her voice became the one thing no one could deny. It rose with the clarity of someone twice her age, carrying the loneliness she didn't yet know how to name. The church discovered her first. A choir director with patient hands and a demanding ear taught her how to control what everyone felt pouring out of her. He struck her lightly in the chest, not out of cruelty, but to bring the sound up from a deeper place. The congregation would hold its breath each time she sang. They said she had a grown woman's voice inside a child's body, and somehow that felt true. But the place that nurtured her talent couldn't protect her from the world. When her foster mother died, the girl was pulled back into a life she didn't choose. Her birth mother brought her to San Francisco, but their tempers clashed like two storms sharing the same sky. The streets offered distraction, and she took it. She skipped school, joined a gang, smoked, drank, pushed against rules that never seemed to protect her anyway. Still, music kept tugging at her sleeve. With two friends, girls who shared her complexion and her hunger for escape, she formed a trio. They called themselves the Creolettes, singing harmonies in borrowed rooms, chasing the feeling of being wanted even if just for a moment. At 14, she met the man who would rename her, repackage her, and send her into the world, Johnny Otis. He heard something undeniable in her voice and gave her a stage before she fully understood what stages could take from a person. He turned the trio into the Peaches. He turned James Etta into Etta, and without fully knowing it, she stepped onto the path that would define her life. One lit by applause but shadowed by the dangers waiting behind every curtain. She didn't yet know how music, men, and the business of talent would bruise her. She only knew the thrill of a microphone, the warmth of a crowd, and the sense, brief, flickering, that maybe her voice could build the home she never had. Chicago came to her like a cold wind carrying opportunity. Chess Records wasn't glamorous from the outside, but inside those narrow hallways lived the pulse of American music. Muddy Waters tuning a guitar, Little Walter laughing in the corner, Chuck Berry pacing the floor with a riff still warm in his hands. Into that world walked a young woman whose voice could bruise and heal in the same breath. Leonard Chess heard her sing once and knew she could cross borders other artists only dreamed of. He didn't need polished performances. He needed a sound that could cut through the noise of pop radio and make people stop whatever they were doing. She delivered that sound with a rawness untouched by training and untouched by fear. They put her straight to work. Background vocals, duets, late-night sessions where the smoke hung thick and the stories were even thicker. She didn't belong to any one genre. She glided between blues, jazz, soul, and pop with the ease of someone who understood longing in all its forms. When she stepped into the booth to record at last, no one knew the song would become a lifetime landmark, etched into weddings, films, and memories for generations. She just closed her eyes, let the orchestra breathe around her, and sang as if she were finally arriving somewhere safe. But success came wrapped in contradictions. Her record climbed the charts, yet the envelope marked royalties held only a sheet of paper reminding her she was $14,000 in debt. The industry praised her voice and starved her pockets. It was a familiar story for Black artists of her time, one she didn't fully understand until it was too late. Still, she rose. All I could do was cry, carried the weight of heartbreak she knew too well. Tell Mama, burned with the fire of a woman refusing to be dismissed. I'd rather go blind, struck a nerve so deep that even hardened men at chess wiped their eyes when they heard the playback. She didn't like singing that one. It felt too honest, too close to the places she avoided in daylight. But the world held onto it the way people hold onto truths they're afraid to speak out loud. Fame also brought her face to face with her idols and her rivals. Billie Holiday warned her not to follow the same path. Dinah Washington shattered glasses in a club the night Etta dared to sing one of her songs. Aretha Franklin became a friend, a woman who understood the price of a powerful voice in a world that tried to control women who had one. Through it all, Etta James kept reinventing herself. The platinum hair, the fearless wardrobe, the rough tenderness in her tone. Each part of her became a blueprint many singers copied but never quite matched. She wasn't just chasing charts. She was carving out space in a world that didn't always want to make room for her. And for a moment, at last, the world seemed to catch up to the force she'd always carried inside. The trouble didn't arrive all at once. It came like a slow drip in the pipes, a sound you ignore until the ceiling gives way. For her, it began with a whisper of escape, a line of powder she thought was something harmless, a moment of curiosity that opened the door to a darker room. What she inhaled wasn't comfort, it was heroin, and it moved through her life like a quiet storm that refused to pass. The drug softened the edges she didn't want to feel. It trimmed away the weight she had carried since childhood. It made silence bearable. But it also took her money, her judgment, her peace. Soon she was chasing a numbness that hollowed her from the inside out. The needle marks climbed her arms, then her feet, then the places she hoped no one would see. She watched two bandmates collapse in front of her, their bodies surrendering to the same hunger she couldn't shake. Loss didn't stop her. It only deepened the craving. There were nights she crossed the border into Mexico with people she barely trusted, trading instruments and pawned jewelry for a handful of relief. There were mornings when she woke in motel rooms that smelled of fear and bleach, unsure where the last hours had gone. The world clapped when she sang, but behind closed doors she was unraveling thread by thread. Prisons and courtrooms became familiar. She wrote bad checks to feed the habit, slipped into jail cells that held too many stories like hers, and came out thinner, shaking, determined to try again. Rehab offered a breath of clarity, but the city's shadows always knew her name. Each time she returned home, someone offered her the thing she was trying to run from, and she ran less each time. Love didn't save her either. She gravitated toward men with sharp edges, men who swung fists before words, men who carried danger like a second skin. Some used her, some hurt her, one nearly destroyed her. Another took the blame for crimes they both committed, serving 10 years while she fought her way through another round of withdrawal and regret. Her body began to surrender. Dirty needles brought infections into her blood and left her locked in a hospital bed with seizures and a jaw frozen shut. Doctors worked to bring her back. Astonished she survived what others didn't. She walked out of the hospital breathing, but she wasn't free. Not yet. One manager offered her drugs the moment she returned to work, and just like that, the cycle began again. Years later, in a dim club filled with smoke and sweat, she said she saw something on the dance floor. A face, a figure she could only describe as the devil waiting for her to choose. Whether it was a vision, a metaphor, or a mind pushed to its edge, she believed it. And belief can be its own kind of rescue. She walked away from heroin that night. Not quickly, not cleanly, but with a resolve that felt different from the promises she had made before. And in that slow climb back to herself, she found a sliver of the woman the world had once celebrated. In America, her story was never just about music. It was about a country learning to hear the voices it had long pushed to the margins. Her rise happened in rooms shaped by segregation, by contracts written without mercy, by an industry that loved black talent but rarely protected it. Audiences admired her power, yet the institutions around her treated her as if her brilliance was something they could borrow without ever having to repay. That contradiction followed her from radio charts to courtrooms, from nightclubs to the final years when awards finally began to carry her name. For many older Americans, she symbolized a generation of artists who gave more than they received. They heard the ache in at last as a reflection of their own battles, their own longing for stability in a turbulent century. They saw her addictions not as weakness but as the cost exacted by a world that celebrated the product while ignoring the person. When she won Grammys late in life, people called it overdue, a reminder of how slowly recognition can move when a black woman stands at the center of the stage. Beyond the borders of the United States, her voice traveled differently. In Europe, blues audiences embraced her long before she became a staple of American nostalgia. At festivals in Switzerland and stages across the UK, listeners treated her music less as entertainment and more as a form of inheritance, an artifact of American truth carried by a woman who had lived every shade of it. Younger rock musicians studied her phrasing, her timing, the grit that never softened even when her health did. To them, she wasn't a troubled singer. She was a blueprint. The contrast was stark. In America, she had to claw her way toward respect that should have been hers from the beginning. Overseas, she arrived already crowned, already understood. The world seemed to recognize something that her own country often struggled to admit, that her voice belonged not only to a genre, but to history itself. And as the years passed, her story became a mirror. Americans looked at her life and asked what it meant to honor an artist fully, not just after the damage was done. The rest of the world listened and wondered how a voice so immense could ever have been overlooked. In the final years of her life, the stages grew smaller, the hospital rooms grew quieter, and the world she once carried on her back began to feel impossibly heavy. Illness dimmed her memory, blurred her handwriting, softened the edges of the woman who had once stormed through studios with a fire no one could contain. Yet even as her body faltered, her music refused to fade. It lived in radios, in film soundtracks, in wedding aisles, in the hearts of people who had never seen her walk onto a stage, but somehow felt they knew her. Legacy arrived slowly, the way morning light creeps across a floor. A Grammy here, a Lifetime Achievement Award there, a star on the Walk of Fame long overdue, but luminous all the same. And each honor felt like a whisper of apology from an industry that had taken too much and returned too little. Her songs became part of America's bloodstream, at last turned into a language of its own, spoken at moments when people reached for hope. I'd Rather Go Blind remained a confession for anyone standing at the edge of heartbreak, and her blues carried the fingerprints of generations who found themselves somewhere inside her stories. People who knew that survival was rarely beautiful, but always brave. Her life was not simple. It was not tidy, but it was deeply, achingly human. She had risen from abandonment, from poverty, from addiction, from loss, and still shaped a sound that outlived every storm she walked through. That is a legacy few artists ever touch. Not perfection, truth. In the quiet after her passing, many listened again to her records and heard something they had missed the first time. The way her voice held both the wound and the healing. The way she carried centuries of struggle and centuries of resilience in a single trembling note. The way she made people believe that broken things could still shine. If her story reminds you of someone who fought, someone who rose, someone who lived louder than the world expected, feel free to share their name. Stories like hers deserve companions. And if you'd like more journeys like this, you're welcome to stay, listen, and walk with us through the lives that shaped our music.